Okay, well, I want to maximize everybody's time and ensure that we have times for Q&A today as well. So again, welcome and thank you for being here. For those that are joining us on the webinar that I don't know, I'm Alicia Benson and I'm the CEO here at Greater Spokane Incorporated. And we're excited today to share with all of our partners the second edition of the Pulse survey. This is a survey that is an independent, nonpartisan tool that's designed to help Spokane's community, business community, policymakers, community organization leaders better understand the community's evolving concerns and priorities. It provides credible, data-driven insights that bridge the gap between public sentiment and policymaking, and it's supporting our ability to think about how we grow, adapt, and lead in our region. The Pulse is the standard by which we measure community outlook and provide policymakers with the data they need to make informed decisions. Our commitment to the community all along and to our policymakers has been to be completely transparent with all of our data and all of our results. To that end, we've engaged two of Washington's leading research firms, EMC Research and Fulcrum Strategic, to conduct these representative polls so Spokane is receiving a clear scientific view of voter opinion of the direction our region is headed. We're sharing this information with an eye toward expanding and supporting the work that GSI does day in and day out to advance our region for our employers, our workforce, and our community. These findings will also inform ongoing advocacy for solutions that enhance quality of life, strengthen economic competitiveness, and rebuild public trust, all rooted in what we're hearing from the community. While the results in the second edition remain largely consistent with the previous survey, there are signs of cautious progress, particularly with perceptions of public safety and downtown. So as we spend the next hour or so together, how we're going to approach this, I'm going to introduce a couple of folks. They're going to walk us through some of the pieces, and then we will have time at the end for Q&A. Most of us are still generally familiar with webinar features, but we do have the chat function enabled at the bottom and the Q&A function. So we aren't going to bring you in, but if you have questions, drop them in there. If you use the Q&A function, you can actually upvote questions. And so when we get to that portion of the program, we'll make sure to answer as many questions as we can with the promise to have you wrapped up by noon today. So a couple of folks joining us today. Christine Varela, who is a partner at DH and the chair of our Regional Advocacy Committee and a GSI board member. She's been working alongside us in this whole process in her role as the RAC chair, and DH has been providing significant support around communications and messaging. And then we have with us today Andrew Teipel, who is with Fulcrum Strategic, and Kevin White with EMC Research, who are the folks who do this work day in and day out as experts across the country and looking at community sentiment and really where voters stand around key issues. So I'm going to hand it over first to Christine to talk about a few parts and pieces, and then we'll jump in.
Thanks, Alicia. Well, we are excited to share with you the Pulse today. Just a little bit of overview around the objectives, the GSI objectives with creating this survey and engaging our research partners. Really look to access rigorous independent data on how people feel about the most pressing challenges in our region, to better understand community perspectives on key issues like public safety, housing, economic opportunity, education, quality of life, to elevate facts over speculations, helping the public, the media, decision makers, policymakers focus on what people are actually saying, not just the loudest voices in the immediate room, to encourage civic engagement and a shared sense of priorities. And finally, to help support accountability by linking policy decisions directly to the needs that residents express. As Alicia mentioned, most importantly, this survey wasn't conducted by GSI. It was led by a professional independent research firm that used a tested methodology. And all of the results, including the detailed crosstabs, are available to the public and on GSI's website. I think my takeaway in this edition of the Pulse of what we learned is encouraging, that Spokane is showing some initial signs of positive momentum in areas of public safety and sentiments around downtown. But it's also clear that major concerns remain and there's a lot of room for improvement. So continuing the momentum and partnership will be important. This survey comes just 6 months after our first pulse survey, and we know that real change doesn't happen overnight. And that's why we weren't surprised to see a lot of the results unchanged from 6 months ago. But we're committed to repeating this survey at least two more times in the next year, and hoping that the broader community sees value in it and something that we could sustain over the long run. The Pulse is one step in a larger effort, not just to understand our community, but to build a stronger, more unified Spokane. To get us started going through the results, I'd like to introduce Andrew Tybalt and Kevin White from EMC.
Well, thank you very much. That's a great summary, and I'm going to dive into the details here. About to share my screen. And if I can get a thumbs up, Christine, if that's, yeah, okay. All right, here we go. Well, welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Tebow. I'm a partner with Fulcrum Strategic. Also with me today is EMC Director Kevin White to provide backup support. So jumping right in with the methodology, it's a pretty standard survey. It's mixed mode. What that means is in addition to traditional phone, we also add email to web and text to web so that we can get a representative sample of county residents. The survey was conducted towards the end of April into May 1st, so pretty fresh data here. We did 600 total interviews, but we broke it up in two chunks of 300. We wanted to have depth of data both within the city and then within the rest of the county. So we did 300 within the city. That's a 5.7 margin of error. And then also an additional 300 outside the city. We then took the data and looked at key demographics and reweighted or adjusted the data so that by demographic characteristics like age, like gender, like where you live, income, education, that the data set reflects the registered voter population in the county as a whole. We also broke out, you'll see in the slides, we got 101 total interviews in Spokane Valley. That's a higher margin of error, but we wanted to show that as well. One of the interesting things about this being a registered voter survey instead of a likely voter survey, we're not trying to model any specific election here. We wanted a broad base of voters. And when you look at registered voters or you survey registered voters as opposed to any likely voter electorate, it's a more progressive, younger, more likely to be renters, more likely to be new to the area. In general, just kind of a more progressive audience than any likely voter universe that we would look at. And so we wanted that the broadest possible universe. Jumping into the demographics here, this is the county as a whole. So you can see, I'm not going to spend time on these, but you can see breakdowns by age, gender, ethnicity, whether you're a homeowner or a renter, education, and how long you've lived. The one variable here that's is a self-reported is party. We don't have party registration on the voter file in Washington State. So this tells you how people self-identify. So in the county as a whole, you can see pretty evenly divided with more Republicans than Democrats or independents. When you jump into these same numbers for the city, you see it's a little more Democratic than Republican or independent. And then Spokane Valley, roughly pretty even. Again, the highest margin of error here. But all of this data is on the website. You can take a look at the demographics in detail. But I'm going to jump into the higher level findings here. So the Pulse Index, and this is an aggregate measure of 7 different kind of quality of life questions. We'll show you those questions. Is statistically unchanged at 3.5 for the county as a whole. Voters, when asked what they like best about living in the region, mentioned things related to the outdoors, so the scenery, outdoor recreation opportunities, and a chunk of people like having all 4 seasons, and mentioned the weather as the best thing about living in this region. On the other side of the coin, concerns about homelessness and crime continue to be top of mind, but concerns for both are down slightly. So in this broader theme of starting to see signs of progress, but still a really long way to go. One of the things to remember as you're looking at all of this data, and we've done these types of surveys in other areas, homelessness and public safety and affordability are huge problems that have been ongoing for quite some time. So it took us a long time to get here. And voters over the years have heard a lot of promises about things getting better. We had, and so it's going to take a while before they trust that this progress that they're starting to see in this, and we're starting to see in this data, they're going to want to see that it's sustained before they free themselves up to be optimistic again. And then on top of that, the uncertainty in the national environment is kind of impinging on that as well, and putting people in a much more wait and see attitude because they don't yet know how national events are going to impact the local economy, and folks are very concerned about their personal financial situation. So homelessness and public safety top of mind. Folks say that addressing these two issues will do the most to improve quality of life, along with keeping parks and recreation areas open and clean. So the two top problems, homelessness and public safety, addressing those, and the thing folks love most about being in the region, maintaining that, are really what voters are saying we need to focus on. Most voters are feeling safer in their own neighborhoods, but still a very long way to go on that. The trend is in the right direction. And voters are also more likely to say they would feel safe visiting downtown Spokane. Now that's a perception, right? And it's the first piece that's necessary before behavior starts to change. You have to think you're going to be safe before you might consider going downtown for dinner or whatever. But we're starting to see some movement there as well. Voters continue to be divided about growth. So roughly 50-50. Those who say overall growth has been a positive for their area mention economic development and job opportunities as the reasons they feel positive about growth. Those who feel negative talk about poor planning and implementation. So it's more about how it's done than reflexively anti-growth attitudes. But as we all know, development and growth is about specific projects, but the general attitudes, voters are fairly divided. Getting into the specific data. So this is the pulse. These are the questions that form the pulse. You can see countywide, we're at 3.5, a little bit higher in the city of Spokane and in Spokane Valley at a 3.6. But just getting close to the yellow, but obviously a long way to go. Some of the constituent questions that make up that aggregate index, looking countywide here, right direction, wrong track is an industry standard about optimism, broad optimism. You can see both on that question and then on the question of is quality of life in the region getting better or worse. You have roughly 6 and 10 in the negative area. So obviously a long way to go. Right direction's gotten a little bit higher, but these are small movements. And what we've seen in other areas where we've done this, again, I talked about the complicated nature of these problems and how long we've been living with them. We do a version of this in the Seattle market called the index. And what we saw is, voters stayed flat for a while on their pessimism. They stayed at 60% or low 60s. And then after a couple of rounds of that, where they're like, okay, I'm seeing progress, I'm seeing it seems to be sustained, then you start to see those movements in optimism take hold. So there's a significant lag between actions on the ground and changes on the ground and actual shifts in attitudes and behaviors. Part of that with regards to downtown, and we've seen this with downtown Seattle as well, is with work from home, people aren't coming downtown as often, and so they're not as likely to see the changes as they would have been in the past. A broad optimism about the future of the region. Voters essentially divided here. Slight majority saying I'm not optimistic, and more intensity on the I strongly disagree that I'm optimistic about the future of the region. This is about the county as a whole. Going to quickly go through. So that's the county. This is the city. A little more optimistic in the city. 51-49 about the future. A little lower, wrong track there. And then in Spokane Valley, very similar to the county as a whole. Have you actively considered moving out of the area? This is another way to gauge attitudes about quality of life in the area. And you can see across the board, roughly 6 in 10 say that they have considered moving out of the area. We saw similar numbers in Seattle that are just starting to come down after folks have seen some sustained progress on public safety and homelessness. These numbers will start to come down. This is a question about the best thing about living in the region. This is an open-end question that differs from a standard question where we offer responses like, do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion? We just read the question. The interviewer on the phone types in the answer, or if the respondent's taking the survey online, they type in the answer online, and then we aggregated those responses into categories. So you lose a little bit of the granularity, but you can see things folks are mentioning about best thing: nature, scenery, landscape, outdoor recreation, and access to public land. Combined, those are 51%. And if you add in the climate, you're at 63% mentioning something related to the outdoors as being the thing they like best. If you look at this by area or region here, it's a similar list at the top with the top three. There's a little bit of variation here, but by and large, similar answers across all three areas. The other side of the coin here, what are the issues facing the region that you are most frustrated or concerned about? You see homelessness and public safety continue to top the list. Homelessness is down. Concern about homelessness is down 4 points in the last 6 months. And concern about public safety is down 6 points over the last 6 months, which these are the trends that we're starting to see: a positive movement in the right direction, but obviously is still a long way to go if half the voters are saying they're frustrated or concerned about homelessness. There was a significant jump in concerns about the government and politics. Obviously, we had an intervening national election in this time, and as people are feeling more uncertain about what's going on nationally, they're focusing more on what's happening locally and what locally elected officials are doing in the face of this uncertainty. But this jumped to 18% and jumped over affordable housing and just housing costs generally. This is the breakdown by region here. Of note here is that in the city of Spokane, a majority mention homelessness, but it's down the most in Spokane, down 5 points. And then public safety, while it's the same in all three areas in terms of the absolute mentions, is down. Concern about safety or mentions of public safety are down 9 points in the city of Spokane. So it was at 42, it's now at 33. And you can see the concerns about government and politics jumping really across all three areas. Do you think overall quality of life is getting better, staying the same, or getting worse? You see roughly 6 in 10 saying getting worse. Again, there is a pent-up demand to be optimistic, but voters are going to have to see a lot of evidence that it's okay to be optimistic before they'll start moving in that direction. And this will generally be a two-step jump, so people will go from worse to the same, and then from the same to better. But you see roughly 1 in 4 thinking that quality of life is getting much worse. So a lot of concern out there, despite what we're seeing, small steps of progress, and particularly around public safety. How concerned are you about your personal financial situation given current economic conditions? I mentioned this at the top. 8 in 10, roughly, in all these areas are concerned. You see a 4-point jump in the county as a whole, a 6-point jump in the city. A lot of intensity here, roughly 4 in 10 or more saying they are very concerned about their personal financial situation. So this colors how you react to almost everything. And it also plays a role, we'll see later on when we look at the visitation numbers for going to downtown Spokane. If you're uncertain about your finances, those entertainment budgets shrink away, and people are less likely to do things like coming downtown to shop or for entertainment. So we've asked what people like best, what most frustrates or concerns them. Then we asked series. We read them these actual statements here and asked them how much they thought that, how much impact they thought that would have on improving quality of life. It was a 7-point scale, so 1 was no impact at all, and 7 was a very significant impact. We really focus on intensity here, those who rate things as high as they're allowed on the scale. So a 7, that's meaningful, and this is sorted by intensity. So you see at the top here, closing encampments, 79% say that would have an impact on improving quality of life. 6 in 10 Spokane County voters say give it the highest possible rating, a very significant impact. You can see overall, those mentioning closing encampments is down 5 points. Keeping parks and recreational areas open, this is a new one. We haven't asked that in the past. You see strong support overall at 9 and 10. Lower intensity, but still half saying that would have a very significant impact on improving quality of life. Then we have a series of issues related to public safety, both on the treatment side and the enforcement side. So increasing efforts to address violent crime and gun violence, improving services for drug addiction and mental health, increasing efforts to address property crime like theft and car break-in. So all of those, 7 and 10, 3/4 or better saying, yes, that would improve quality of life, and close to half saying it would have a very significant impact. These next two about local businesses, making it easier to start and grow a business and helping local businesses deal with public safety concerns, another public safety related issue, but also economic. What we've seen as the uncertainty has increased around the national economy is that folks want to do things to protect their local economy and in particular protect local small businesses, as the economic engines that in some ways can inoculate the region against uncertainty at the national level. And so we've seen concern about protecting local economy really spike in the last few months. So that was the county as a whole. You can see in the city of Spokane itself, you see parks and enclosing encampments roughly the same in terms of intensity. In the city, closing encampments is down 10 points because folks are seeing some progress. But the list itself, while there's some small shifts in position, the general thrust of the list is the same from top to bottom. And then in the valley, in Spokane Valley, you can see even more intensity around encampments, closing encampments, and then public safety, and then Parks and Rec a little bit lower here, but that's one that has a lot of 5s and 6s. So folks believe it will have an impact. They might not think it's quite as urgent as homelessness and public safety, but there is broad support. Getting into some of the public safety questions. This is a question about your neighborhood. So thinking about safety in your neighborhood, including property crime and violent crime, compared to 2 years ago, do you feel more safe or less safe? And if you say less safe, we ask, is that much less safe or somewhat less safe? The really great news here is this is down 17 points. Those saying less safe in the county as a whole, down 18 points in the city of Spokane, down 23 points in Spokane Valley. So that's the really good news. You've seen massive movements and people feeling safer in their own neighborhoods compared to 2 years ago. The other side, or the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say, is that that's great, but we still have roughly half saying, I feel less safe than 2 years ago. So in an absolute sense, it's still much too high, but in terms of trend, it's moved really dramatically in the right direction. And what we would want to see in the next versions of the Pulse is that this trend is holding up. We asked some specific questions about items related to public safety and asked how important is it to you to provide funding for that item? 1 to 7, 1 not at all important, 7 extremely important, so showing everything above the midpoint. And you can see that folks both want more police officers and they want more treatment options and they want youth engagement. So it really is an all of the above approach on public safety. Voters recognize that all of these things are important for solving the problem. They recognize the complexity of the problem. And this is just, are these things important to fund? So if you look at this is the countywide. If you look at the city, a little bit higher in terms of total importance, a little bit of reordering, but the list again, similar, and then a little bit lower across the board in Spokane Valley, but again, the same general ordering of these items. So that is, do we need more funding? One of them was, do we need more funding for police officers? You saw that on the list kind of in the middle there. But in terms of the priority, not whether or not, it's something important to fund, but how much of a priority is it? Is it an immediate priority? You see roughly 7 in 10 saying it's an immediate priority for them, and, a third to a little bit more strongly agreeing. Consistent with the other gains that we've seen, particularly within the city of Spokane around public safety and concern about public safety, this 11-point drop from 79% to 68% in the last 6 months in the city of Spokane says to me that voters are starting to see, and I see this in other questions as well, progress on public safety, and so that the urgency is down a little bit within the city, but flat in Spokane Valley. Attitudes about government and taxes. This city that you see here in brackets, what we did is we looked at the voter file, and based on where we lived, we filled in the proper response. So if they lived in the city, we said that city name. If they were not in a city, we said county. So this is really, your local government has enough money to address important priorities. They just need to spend it more effectively. 7 in 10 agree across the board in all three areas that the city does have enough money, or local government does have enough money. And some of that belief is driven by challenges around trust and believing that the local governments have a plan for these issues. So I trust my local government to spend tax dollars responsibly. Only about a third agree. Roughly 2/3 say I disagree, that I trust my local government to spend my tax dollars responsibly. It's gotten a little better in Spokane. We did not ask it countywide, and we asked it just about the city last time. But you see some positive movement. But again, like a broken record, still a really long way to go on trust. And then having an effective plan to address the critical issues facing the city. Here, only 1 in 5 agree. And there's actually less agreement in the city about having an effective plan to address these issues. So if you don't really trust your local government to spend the money wisely, and you don't think they have a plan, that's going to feed into this idea that the money is there. They just need to do a better job with it. My local government should focus on funding the basics like filling potholes, maintaining parks, and addressing public safety. Doesn't matter where we ask this right now, and back to basics go in and out of favor with voters, depending on mostly on how optimistic and kind of economically confident they are feeling. And the less certain they're feeling about their own personal financial situation, and the less optimistic they're feeling about the region and the progress, the more they're going to say, let's just drill. And also trust plays into that, that we saw on the previous slide. Folks across almost everywhere we're interviewing right now are really leaning back into a back to basics mentality. And you can see the intensity here. So 9 out of 10 agree with this. 6 in 10, as high as 65% strongly agree. That's a lot of intensity behind this. So voters really do want local governments to be focusing on the basics. 2 questions about public schools. They need more funding to improve educational outcomes. You have roughly 6 in 10 across the board, a little higher in the city of Spokane. Intensity around a third or more saying, yeah, they do need more money. But there's a trust issue here as well. And trust for all institutions has been really cratering over the last few years. And public schools are not immune. So I trust my local public school district to make decisions that benefit students in the community. You see essentially divided here, but with more intensity on the strongly disagree side. So a majority disagree countywide, 6 points, disagreement 6 points higher, roughly even in the city, and then 9 points lower in the city of Spokane Valley. Housing and growth. All things considered, growth and development has been a positive for my area. So this is kind of the top line growth question. And we do say has been a positive for my area. You can see voters fairly closely divided. Overall, narrow majority countywide, not a lot of intensity on either side. More positive attitudes about growth within the city of Spokane, and getting a little better over the last 6 months, up to 55-45, and then down the middle in the city of Spokane Valley. And this is a more direct support for growth question. I support the building of more types of housing in my neighborhood. What you see here is, general overall attitude about growth being a positive or negative is +5 countywide. Supporting more types of housing in my neighborhood is -6 countywide. So that's an 11-point shift. And you can see starting to drive up the intensity on the negative side, the positive side as well. The city goes from +11 to +4, so just a little bit of a dip there, but intensity jumps on both sides there as well. And city of Spokane Valley goes from -1 to -12, so that's an 11-point drop. Those folks, so on this question, all things considered, growth and development has been a positive. We took those who said, I agree, and those who said, I disagree, and said, why do you agree? Economic growth and job opportunities, housing improvements. So it helps with affordability, but it creates more stock. It increases value. And then you see some others going down the list here. At the top of the list for those who say growth has not been a positive for my area. Poor urban planning and development decisions is 26% mentioned that. Leadership and governance criticism, 16%. So you see here you have 42% mentioning something about implementation, design and implementation, before you get to concerns about overcrowding and infrastructure. Some of those impacts increased, public safety concerns. Downtown visitation and economic recovery. So we asked people how optimistic do they feel about the area's economy. This is another one where we've seen some movement away from pessimism, but still a long, long way to go. So in 2024, 6 months ago, 51% said they were pessimistic about the area's economy. That's down to 42%. The problem is, in the intervening time with that question, I'm concerned about my personal financial situation. The local economy, attitudes about that in many ways are superseded by concern and worry about what's going on with the national economy. So you see that going from 51 to 42 countywide, really not as a much less significant change in the city, went from 45 to 43 pessimism. And all of this is going to I'm kind of neutral here. It's not really going to optimism. And then in Spokane Valley, it went actually from 49 to 38. So an interesting drop there. Folks continue to be worried about the future of downtown. And a big part of that is because they recognize how central downtown Spokane is to the region's economic health. We ask this in a lot of areas where there's an urban area that's more liberal and then kind of the outlying areas. And, the conventional wisdom is always everybody's angry at the downtown and feel like it gets more attention. But what we've seen time and time again is that voters, even outside their regional city, overwhelmingly recognize how central that downtown is to not just the region's economic health, but to quality of life in the region. We've asked that question in the past as well. You see really strong intensity of agreement here. And then in that area of voters, feeling uncertain about the national economy and really drilling down on things that will help insulate the local economy. We asked this question: recent policy decisions by your local government are causing small businesses to close and move away. You see countywide, 7 in 10 agreeing that, a third strongly, a little bit higher in the city of Spokane and a little bit lower in the city of Spokane Valley. This is one of my favorite slides because it's a precursor, or we hope it's a precursor to change in behavior. So this is that question. I would feel safe visiting downtown Spokane during the day and at night. What we've seen during the day here is a 10-point jump in those agreeing in all three areas. So overall, countywide, it went from 58 to 68. In the city, it went from 61 to 71. And in the Spokane Valley, it went from 56 to 65. So that's good movement. The intensity here is on the agree side. We're seeing decent movement for folks saying I'd feel safe visiting downtown at night as well, which is great news and a big jump within the city. But even with that big jump, still only 37% within the city of Spokane say they would feel safe visiting downtown at night. So obviously, um, this is a precursor to changes in behavior, and it's good to see this, but this really needs to keep moving in a positive direction. And those who disagree, there's intensity there. They're saying, I strongly disagree that I would feel safe visiting downtown at night. So good progress, but a really long way to go. Uh, and so that was an attitude. This is a behavior, and there's going to be a significant lag between that behavior or that attitude starting to change about how safe downtown is, and actual behavior change, people visiting downtown. And then when they do visit downtown, it's really important that they have a good experience or they're going to go right back. It's really easy to lose the momentum. It's difficult to sustain it, but it can have this snowball effect. And even this data can help shift perceptions amongst voters. One of the values here is voters get to see what other voters are thinking and feeling and doing. And that obviously influences how they think, feel, and do. So, are you visiting more or less or about the same as you did a year ago for activities other than work? And on past calls, folks have pointed out that the visitation data really supports what we're seeing here. So even though you're seeing that 10-point gain in the attitude, you're still seeing roughly 6 in 10 saying I'm visiting less often, and around anywhere from 37 to 53% saying they're visiting much less often. Now, what we'd hope to see over the next few versions of the Pulse is that the attitude continues to get better about how safe downtown is. And then, eventually that will start to trickle into these numbers as well, the actual behavior. That's it. I'm going to, one other thing I'm going to point out here, online with the full deck, we have subgroup slides for all of the questions that are asked within the survey. So we break it down, those regional differences. So this is the overall quality of life index, which is at 3.5. You can see it by region, you can see it by gender, you can see it by age group. Interestingly, and we've seen this in Seattle as well, usually 65 plus voters aren't the most optimistic voters about quality of life, but we see that here. You can look by ethnicity, self-identified party identification, what they tell us their party ID is and what they tell us their ideology is, homeowner, renter, and then education. Do you want me to stop sharing or leave up the key findings here?
You may
I think you
go
go
ahead,
ahead, Alicia.
Christine. I would say you may want to leave. I mean, I think both, because I think a couple of the questions you might want to reference back to answer, and then we can go from there.
Yep.
Thank you, Andrew. And just a couple of comments before we get to Q&A. I just want to kind of reinforce that we see the survey that really amplifies the community voice. So again, the registered voters in Spokane County, that helps us to have a better understanding, be able to have better dialogue around the issues and the policies that are important to this region. And in turn, the long-term outcome is better outcomes. And a little bit to what Andrew said, we really see this as a civic resource or a civic tool, which is part of this commitment to transparency and availability of the data, so that no matter, if you're at an employer, you're part of an organization working on one of these issues, you're a policymaker, that this data is available for everyone to be able to really understand where is the Spokane voter at on key issues. The other piece I would say is just to know for GSI as representative of the employer and business community, we play a vital part in this. And that we're committed to continuing to be part of the work and the solutions. We know as we think about the issues of public safety, homelessness, support for local businesses, mental health, these issues are cross-sector and cross-cutting, and it really is about regional collaboration and regional partnership. And that the work of rebuilding public trust and being able to make meaningful progress, to what Andrew has said kind of a number of times, this isn't going to happen overnight. So there are things that may be in place that are beginning to work, but we don't yet see outcomes, or there are needs for things that aren't yet in place. And so the ability to measure over time, which is why when we did the initial launch last October, that our commitment to do this at least for 2 years, our hope is to be able to do it longer, so that we continue to be able to see progress being made and identify places we still have work to do. Like our partners in Seattle have seen now 4 years in, there's been a lot of shift in a number of places. And so we just see it as a critical space to be a thought leader, and to be able to lean in on important conversations for the region. And we've seen great, it's been interesting since the first one to today, just a lot of interest from a lot of different partner organizations across issues and areas. Our local policymakers at the city level and county level, a lot of interest in this as they're working on the hard issues on our region. So I'm going to share a link where everything is posted on our website, and we will also send a follow-up communication to everybody that's registered to make it easy for you to get there. And so I now want us to kind of dive into some Q&A. It is open. The Q&A is open. I believe the chat is actually enabled, and you can raise your hand if you prefer to ask the question. And I'm going to let Christine kind of navigate through this. As I make that transition, there were a couple of questions about visitors, which are great questions to be asking. And again, this work is really focused on those of us that live here, but there's lots of ongoing conversation with Visit Spokane, with Downtown Spokane Partnership, that do a lot of work around the visitor experience. And so we'll continue to sync up on that, and would be maybe valuable to share alongside this as we look at perceptions and feelings of our community. So with that, Christina, maybe I'll hand it over to you to kind of facilitate some of the Q&A.
Great. Thank you. Andrew, there is a question from Kevin Dudley asking how we should interpret the data that shows a supermajority of respondents believe schools need more funding to improve educational outcomes, but when it comes to them trusting schools to make decisions that benefit students in the community, the numbers dip a bit. Is this simply a trust thing or something more?
Yes. So needing more funding to improve educational outcomes isn't about the entity that's doing that spending or creating the curriculums or anything like that. It's just saying, yeah, our schools need more money. The trust issue is about, do you trust the institution that you would be giving that money to spend that money wisely? And there are, if you're thinking in the context of a ballot measure, you really need several legs of the stool. One is, it has to be a benefit that the community thinks is important. The amount of the measure has to be reasonable for the benefit that you're getting. And then the third leg is, you want to trust that the money is going to be spent in a transparent and an accountable way to deliver those benefits that you feel are worth investing in. You don't have to have all three legs of the stool to pass a ballot measure, but it makes it a lot easier. It makes it much more uphill if trust is broken. And I think some of that may be specific to the schools, but there's an erosion in trust of all institutions. And really, voters are in a mindset of distrust in terms of, whenever they're hearing messaging, they're like, how am I being manipulated how is this person trying to manipulate me? They don't really feel like they have as many voices speaking for them as they used to.
Thanks, Andrew. Another question from Dennis. What changes have been implemented to change the numbers negatively or positively? Maybe, Andrew, you could speak a little bit to the question and what it asks and doesn't, and how you have seen respondents interpret how they get to their feelings and perceptions of safety.
Yeah, I mean, so let me give an example that we've seen in Seattle that I think is instructive, and then I'll talk a little bit about Spokane, and I'll also say my favorite polling cliche, which is perception is reality. So more broadly speaking, if voters feel downtown is unsafe, it doesn't matter what the actual circumstances are. That perception has to be addressed before they're going to feel safe coming downtown. In Seattle, what we've seen in there, we've done 8 versions of this type of survey there. And so the community has become habituated to looking for it. It's become a real valuable shared civic resources resource where folks can go if they want to understand what voters are thinking or doing. And has become it's put us in a much better starting place for policy conversations because we now have a resource that we can point to that's transparent, independent, where we can say, no, actually, this is what voters think about public safety. So 2 versions of this survey ago in Seattle. Before that index number 7 went into the field. The 6 months prior to that, the city had put policies and actions in place on the ground around encampments. And when we did that index survey, after those actions had been on the ground, we saw double-digit movements in attitudes around homelessness and encampments, but not really on other stuff. Between the current index and the last index, the city has put policies and procedures on the ground around public safety. They had a real focus on public safety. And what we saw this time in the index in Seattle was double-digit drops in concern about public safety. So that suggests to me that voters are paying attention to things happening on the ground and reacting to them because everything else seems to be holding constant. I don't know what specific actions have been on the ground in Spokane that might have led to these, but my sense is that we've seen in other places, voters are paying really close attention to what they are seeing and hearing. And maybe somebody, Alicia could answer what's going on policy-wise.
So I think a couple of pieces to it I just would say is that we don't ask specifically in any of the questions if there's a specific policy that people allude to one way or the other. But a couple, there are things we know, like in the city of Spokane, for example, they passed the Proposition 1 last fall. So there have been the beginning of whether that's actually showing up in the data yet or not when we think about police force on the ground or things in downtown. There's a lot of work that partners like Downtown Spokane Partnership have been doing around activation in the core and getting folks back in for the various, activities that happen throughout the course of the year. So I think we're going to see more of that begin to show up actually in the next survey because of the timing of when those things have gone into place. The other one that we've talked quite a bit about over the last few days is that the question around has your city local policies that are having businesses move in or move away or move out of their city. One of the pieces with that is whether it's actually a policy of the city or the fact that there's a lot of policy that has been implemented at the state level that has very direct impacts on our local business economy. And so whether or not, again, is it something specific actually to that city, or is it something that's happening in the state of Washington environment, or the uncertainty at the federal level with some of, funding, those kinds of things. That's been part of the conversation around, in a next iteration, is there opportunity or does it make sense to ask more explicitly? But again, it's a bit more generalized in its response.
Yeah, and also the act of a voter voting for a public safety measure will create improvements in perceptions about public safety, even if they haven't yet seen it on the ground, because they've invested in that and they've seen that that's something that's going to be done, right? And so that gives them more optimism around public safety.
Other questions?
Maybe we'll wait for a second to see if anybody does. I'm just looking at the couple. Kevin had responded to a couple of questions that had been in the chat around how things are defined. And I just didn't know maybe if Andrew or Kevin, you just want to speak. I think that a little bit even to this last question, just when we ask, we don't define things explicitly, right. Just kind of the methodology around that maybe.
Right. So,
You muted yourself.
Oh, I don't know how I did that. Do you want to answer that, Kevin? I'm happy to.
Yeah,
so,
go ahead.
Yeah. So So it doesn't matter whether it's, I saw more foot patrols. They, were responding to graffiti. They did this, whatever, whatever the respondent perceives as safe or safety is what's going to impact their behavior. So we're specifically broad in those questions because policy wise, certainly it matters for solutions, but we're just trying to get at attitudes. Are you feeling safer? Do you feel like homelessness is getting better? As this survey matures, and we start to see shifts in perceptions, we'll probably add questions about the specifics. And, there have been versions of the index where we talk about more specific policy measures that are being considered. But right now, we're just trying to get a broad sense of where folks are and how they are moving in ways that they define public safety, in ways that they define quality of life. We don't define what safer in your neighborhood means because if I feel unsafe, it doesn't really matter why. I mean, it does, but you feel unsafe and you're acting on that.
Thanks, Andrew. Another question, and maybe this is for you, Alicia, around if someone can speak to how the business community can help or hinder shifting public perception. For example, when there are more businesses active, more walkability, less vacant space, there tends to be a decrease in encampment activity. On the flip side, if the environment feels like it poses a risk to the feasibility of business being successful, that's a big psychological lift.
Yeah, I mean, sorry to keep talking about Seattle, but when Amazon came back 5 days a week in office, we saw there was a South Lake Union. There were lines to get coffee, which made everyone excited because that hadn't happened. And it really looked alive and like it was pre-pandemic. But there was the further you went away from Amazon, the more it went back to, what you're probably seeing downtown, and other areas. And so return to office has a dramatic impact. It has, it's a really thorny issue, but in terms of making people feel safer, making them more active, getting people to visit, it has a tremendous impact.
Yeah, and I would concur with that. I think both, obviously for the heart and, which we saw 90 plus folks at the heart of the vibrancy of the downtown core. We also see people getting to feel about the same, at least, as safety in their neighborhoods and their own. So I think we as businesses and employers play a big part. Again, back to this isn't just about the public sector being able to put policies in place. This is also our commitment to how are we driving activation? How are we driving the engagement of employees when they're in the space? How are we encouraging our neighbors and friends to take the chance and show up? I mean, there is so much. When we think about just the entertainment districts that we built in our core, the sports activities that are going on, there's a lot of opportunity to put your toe back in and be part of building that experience and being part of the neighborhood. And our businesses in the core depend on that. They depend on the foot traffic. I think what we've seen is that, visitors' perception of it is a bit different than those of us that live here. And so we can be our worst critics as residents of our own community. And so that's a piece of it and part of the way we come together and also be partners and collaborators with our public sector as we really share what our experiences are, what's working and what's not working when we think about the safety concerns or activation needs for our employees and our customers. It's a whole piece of that. And I think for, folks like us and some of our partners, we're continually telling our public sector partners that we want to be part of the solution, but we also need to be listening to our stakeholders, and that becomes really key, that we need to be sourcing all of that information. So it is an all of the above, because to what Andrew said earlier, if the experience is not positive, then you quickly retreat back, and it took us a long time. It's not just one thing that got us here. It has changed. The workforce has changed immensely, and it's going to take us a long time for whatever the recalibration around that looks like. And so the more we can be working together on being our own best advocates for our communities and for downtown matters significantly.
Yeah, and there's a real opportunity as you head into spring and summer, right?
Hugely.
Thank you.
There's a list. If folks want it, visit Spokane DSP are putting together a weekly communication of all of the things happening across downtown. And there is so much opportunity.
Right. Andrew, a question from TJ. Housing was a lower priority from the respondents than some of the other issues. That piece struck me as the reasons from even the pro more housing respondents didn't seem to significantly connect to improvements in availability or affordability. Is that an accurate takeaway?
I
Yeah,
can
I
field this
mean, I
one.
think, oh, go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, so that question we asked was actually about growth. So it was a little more broad than just housing. And I do believe that mentions of housing affordability and availability was actually the second most cited reason for being pro-growth, whereas jobs and economic development was number one. So I'd say that it is actually a something that a lot of voters connect to. You can see there 15% of those who are pro-growth, but because this is not specifically about housing, that's why we see economic growth and job opportunities be more. So this is that's sort of a follow-up to that top question there on the slide. The all things considered, growth and development has been a positive for my area.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is when you're looking at issues that most need to be addressed, we're kind of in a triage situation here. Not that affordable housing isn't kind of at the also near the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but public safety and homelessness have been such existential crises that they've been getting the attention. And I would expect concerns about affordability and cost of living as folks start to believe that those other problems are being handled in an effective way that affordability will jump in that list. And we know from statewide research in lots of different areas of Washington state that cost of living is a huge part of people's thinking right now. And that question about concern about personal financial situation, that includes housing costs as well.
All right. If anyone has one more question, oh, we've got one. This will be our last one. The population of Spokane County is 540,000 with a survey population of 600. Which of the findings are significantly reliable to rely upon for public policy decisions?
All of them within a margin of error of 5.7 points, essentially. Well, the overall margin of error, sorry, getting back. So our overall margin of error is plus or minus 4.4 percentage points. And I know this always surprises people that you can do 600 interviews and how can you accurately represent 540,000 people? And really, the truth is, once the key to statistical projectability is it's a random survey. Everybody has an equal opportunity of being a participant. When someone doesn't answer the phone or email, we replace them with somebody who has similar demographics to them. So it's all of the answers are statistically projectable within a margin of error of plus or minus 4.4 points. What that means is if you took an answer that was 50% yes, 50% no, so the narrowest divide you could possibly have, that margin of error, that those answers could change by 4.4 points in either directions. As you move to the ones that are more like 70-30 or 90-10, the margin of error gets even smaller, but we report the worst case margin of error.
And Andrew, again, we had a question similar to this in one of our other sessions.
Yep.
If you were to go out and repeat this with 600 folks, you would anticipate that your answers would be within, they would be repeated in similar category fashions within that 4.4 margin of error. So you could expect to see the same results.
Yeah, and it's a little technical, but this is called a 95% confidence interval. So what that means is 95 times out of 100, the responses would be within the margin of error, right? And it's a bell curve. So again, the more extreme any response is, the lower the margin of error. But yes, 95 times out of 100, it'll be within the margin of error. And one of the reasons doing a project like this is so great is that you have data over time, right? And so you can look to see if it's consistent over time and if the shifts that you're seeing make sense and are sustained, or are they just blips that are a function of the sample that you had that time.
Great, thank you. I know we're at time, Alicia. Do you want to close us out?
Just want to say thank you all for taking time to be here. A thank you to Andrew and Christine and Kevin. As I shared, everything is posted on our website, so you can, for those of you that are the data wonks, you can dive into the crosstabs. And if you do have questions, please don't hesitate to follow up with us, and we can work to get those questions answered. And we did. After the last one, there are different community groups that we had follow-on conversations with as they wanted to kind of dive in and think about their work and the policy pieces. So again, we want to be here to be a resource to our community as we continue to move this work forward. So have a great rest of your day, everybody, and thank you again.